Hello everyone and welcome back to Code Escuela. The QuickGrid Blazor component is a component that, as its name suggests, allows you to quickly and easily display tabular data. Before we continue, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel to get updated with our latest videos. Let's get started. Open up your Visual Studio 2022 and let's create a new project. So let's create a new project here. And for this one, we will select Blazor Web App, click Next, and let's name this for our solution would be Blazor Demo. And then for the project name, let's just name this QuickGrid Demo. Okay, so let's click Next. And then let's just leave the defaults here. We'll be using .NET 9, no authentication. And then the render mode would be server. And then set it as global. And then just don't use top level statements. Then leave the include sample pages as checked, and then let's click create, and then let's just wait for a few moments for our project to get created, and then we should be getting our project generated by now. And so let's just quickly run this one so that we can see that it runs correctly. Okay, and so it should load the default home page, right? So let's close this one up. Now, to use the QuickGrid component, first we need to install the NuGet package. So let's just right click on our dependencies here and then select Manage NuGet Packages. And then what we are going to look for is the QuickGrid component. So you can just quickly type in QuickGrid, hit enter, and then the first one you see here should be named Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.Components.QuickGrid, and then latest would be, as the time of the creation of this video, would be 9.0.6. And then let's just click the install button here, then click apply, click I accept, then it should be able to install this component. Okay, and so now once that's done, we can move on to the next part, which would be quickly showing or uh, easily setting up our quick grid. Okay, so for this one, let's pretend that we are going to display a list of cars. And so for us to do that, let's just create a class first that would define our car, a car, I mean a class named car. So let's just create here a folder. Let's name it models. So this is where we will place our car class. So let's just right click on the models, select add, and then select class. Let's name it a car. Okay, and then this car will be our model for our first quick grid demonstration. So this will just have a basic properties. So let's say we can quickly add fields here. This will be simple fields only. We have our ID, our model, manufacturer, and year. So basically, most aside from the ID, the rest of the properties will be just string. Okay, now that we have that, next thing we'll do is open our home page, which is home.razor, and then let's just quickly replace this with, let's say, dash cars. Now we'll need to clear out this contents here. So first thing we'll do is that we need to set up some data that will become a source for our quick grid component. And to do that, uh, we'll need to have a list of cars. And so let's add a code here. So this will store within our C# code. And so since QuickGrid uses iQueryable or accepts iQueryable source of data, so let's just create our iQueryable here. So let's pretend that this would be the list of cars, or this could come from any other source like a service that would generate or produce this kind of data. So let's type up here, and so let's just pull this up, this class, since it's on a different namespace which would be under models. Let's quickly pull that namespace up, and then so now that we have that, we can just initialize this here. Okay, so we can easily do that by doing this new car. Then for example, let's say 1, id is to 1, model is equal to cougar, and then manufacturer is equal to Mercury, and finally we have the year, which is 1992. Okay, now since we need more data than what we have here, I've already prepared some sample data sets that we can use. Let me just copy and paste it here, right? And then paste it here, so we don't need to be typing all of this one. uh, Anyways, I will be putting this one up in our repo, so you can visit this one. And one thing to remember though is for this one, we need to return it as a as queryable. Okay, since we are initializing an iQueryable of cars. Okay, so now that we have this, so this will become now our data source. Now we can just quickly uh, use our QuickGrid component. So to do that, you can type in QuickGrid like that. Oops. Okay. We can just pull up the namespace for this. You can control that and then get this using, since we will be using this QuickGrid. Now, the first thing to note that for the QuickGrid, it needs to have a data source. Okay. And so to do that, first thing you need to set is the items. Okay. So it has this items property, which you can set directly coming from an iQueryable uh, object. Okay, so in this case, we can just type it in the cars. This would be our cars item here. And then after that, we can now define our properties. We can do that by using the property column. Okay, and then from each of the properties, we can map it by using the uh, property field. Okay, so you can do that by doing that and then passing in the property that you are going to map against. Okay, so for this one, let's just map it as id, and then let's display all of the columns. You can just copy paste it here for the rest of the fields, since you have model, and then we have manufacturer, and then lastly we have the year. Okay, so let's try running this one up. Okay, and we should be able to see that we are going to get a display of table for the cars. Okay, so as you can see, you can easily display uh, tabular data by just using QuickGrid. Just set the items and then you're good to go. Okay, you uh, define the columns, and then yeah, you should be able to define whatever customizations that you want to display for this one. With this one also, you can add a class. So since by default Bootstrap is used here, you can use the Bootstrap classes to uh, add CSS to your, or add styling to your table. So let's just try bordered. You can also add table hover. If if we save this one, we should be able to have a bootstrap uh, table, okay, including the hover style. Okay, now it looks much better. All right, and so with this one, you might have noticed that everything is being shown. You can also add pagination to this one. And so how do we do that? So what we need to do is, let's hide this first. We can use the pagination state or pagination control. But before you can do that, you need to have to declare a pagination state. So let's do that here, pagination state, and then named it as pagination state. This will become the data source for your paginator component. Okay, you pagination state with items per page. This would be the number of rows on each display, okay, or page. So let's set it by 10, and then after that you can use that to attach to a paginator control component. Okay, so here we need to add the paginator and then set the state into the pagination state. And then to attach this paginator control, we can set in our QuickGrid the pagination state. Okay, so by we can do that by using the pagination property and set it to the name of our pagination state, right? And then once we've done that, we can save this one and see the results. Let's refresh. Okay, so now as you can see, you have your pagination controls at the bottom. Now you can do this, or you can place this anywhere you want. You can even have it appear multiple times. Let's say at the top, hit save, and yeah, you can have these pagination controls on the top and the bottom sections of your table. So if you click on these controls, you can navigate through each of the pages. Okay, and so you can go at the first page and then at the last page. And one thing to note also is that there's this, since QuickGrid has some way of knowing what rows to display. Part of its mechanism is it displays this empty set of rows. Okay, just take note that this kind of behavior is present in QuickGrid. All right, but anyways, this is how you easily set up QuickGrid. Okay, and one thing to note also is that aside from that, you can add additional filtering controls for each of the column. Okay, but before we forget, you can also add sorting for your columns. So to add sorting for your column, you can use the, or add the sortable property. Set it to true. Okay, and then once you save this one, what happens is that you should be able to click on the column header, and then it would let you sort through your list, okay, or your table. So it could sort by ascending and descending order. If you click again, you can see that the arrow would point on a different direction. So in this case, it's been sorted by descending. Okay, all right, and then sort by ascending. So if you can see, it starts from alphabetically from A to Z. Okay, so that's one way of adding sorting to your columns. Of course, you can apply to each of the different columns. You just add this sortable is equal to true property, right? And lastly, you can add filtering, as I've mentioned before. And so how do you do that? it's a bit more involved, but it's not that difficult. Okay, so here we can add the column options, and in the column options we will be setting or adding an input that would accept the filter. Let's type it, set it as type search, and then we need to bind it to our filter value. So in this case we haven't added one. Let's just add one here. Let's name this string of model filter, initialized into an empty string, then set it here as our filter name. And then one thing to remember also is we need to bind this to an event, which would equal to on input. Now what happens is that when you type in characters into this search box, it QuickGrid would react and then apply filter. Okay, so let's just close this one up, add some additional settings for the class so that it looks uh, better with the bootstrap styling, and then set this autofocus. Okay, now we're not done here yet. What happens now is, since we are working against a filtered data, what would happen now is we would have to define a new set of uh, data source that would apply filtering. Okay, and so to do that, again here we will set up a new uh, filtered cars variable. Okay, and now what would happen is that it would come from our data source, which is the cars list here, but with the filtering uh, included. Okay, and so here let's finish this one. This would be with QuickGrid, it would accept a nullable iQueryable of type. Okay, so now we would set this as coming from the cars from here. Let's just pretend that this would come from somewhere else, okay, or some other different service that would just return an iQueryable of cars. Okay, and then here we will apply our filtering. Okay, so now X would become, or since we're filtering against the model, let's search the model that would contain the car model filter that we pass in. Okay, I missed that. It's only model filter. Okay, and then it would need to be invariant culture, ignore case. Okay, so it isn't case sensitive. All right, and then after that we should be able to filter this one out. Okay, so now we're having a bit of a problem here. Let's just stop this for a second here. So the cars would come from here. It should be in this mode. Okay, lambda operation. And then as you can see, we are going to use this filtered cars as our new data source for our QuickGrid, since we are now applying a filter for our data. So now we just need to replace our cars initially with filtered cars. Okay, and then let's run this one, and we should be able to see that we can now apply filtering for our model column. Okay, so here you can see that there's this icon here. You can click on that one and then it will show you the search box, and then you can just search by typing in the filter, and as you can see, it filters in real time. Okay, so as you type, you can clear that one by clicking the close one, and then it will uh, close the rest of, or clear out your filter. Okay, now you can apply this to multiple columns. You do the same thing. you uh, bind or just add this column options, bind it to your filter for that specific column, and then here you can just append, okay, an and condition that would contain another condition aside from the one that you just had for this one. Okay, so you can apply multiple filters for this uh, quick grid component, okay, by just using the column options. All right, and so this is one quick way of utilizing the quick grid via in-memory data source. Okay, the next thing that we will do is to use EF Core or Entity Framework Core as our data source for the quick grid. And so to do that, for this one, we will be utilizing the Northwind SQLite database. So if you are just curious on where you can get that copy of that Northwind, but I will be adding this the version for this one included on the repo, so you don't need to go and download a separate one from this. But if you're just curious, it comes from this GitHub repo coming up from JPY3, and then yeah, it should be around here like this one. Yeah, under the dist folder, and then you have this Northwind DB. So this will be the SQLite database that we will be using for this example. Let's head back. And so first thing we'll do is get a copy of that Northwind database added to our project. So let's just add a new folder here on our project. Let's right click and then select add new folder. Type in data. So all of the EF core related classes will be placed under here. And then we will just get or grab a copy of that Northwind database. Okay, then add it here. So yeah, for this one, I'll be adding this database also on the repo once this video will be published. All right. So after that, the next thing we will do is install the NuGet package that QuickGrid needs. It will be specifically the entity framework adapter package. So to do that, we'll go to right click our dependencies here and then manage NuGet packages. And then let's head on to browse, and then let's type QuickGrid entity framework. And then the one that we should be looking is this one, microsoft.aspnetcore.components.quickgrid.entity framework adapter. And so this one also includes the uh, EF core library as part of this package. Okay, so let's just install this one. So apply and then I accept, and then this should be installed quickly. And so after that, we also need to add another package. Since we are using SQLite, we also need to have the EF core SQLite package. Okay, so this would be like an adapter for EF core for SQLite. So let's just type in EF core SQLite here. Then first thing you'll see here should be this one. This one is the package that we will be using. Okay, so let's just install this, apply, and I accept. So what we're doing right now is just setting up our EF core so that we can use it as a data source for our QuickGrid. But actually, once you use QuickGrid, it's just as easy as the one that we did on in-memory data source from the first demo that we did. Okay, so now that we have our necessary packages installed, let's create a new class, or that would become a model. So since we are going to use the suppliers table, we will create a class that models that supplier table. So let's right click on our models, select add, and then select class. Okay, and then let's name this supplier, add, and then for this one, we will just have a very basic definition for this class. So its properties will be very basic. Okay, and so let's open up our uh, let me just grab that existing code already. And so here we have our fields that I will just copy and paste from, since yeah, so we can save time. So basically you have your basic properties here: supplier ID, company name, contact title, address, city, and regions. Now bear in mind that on the actual table there will be more fields there. We just selected this uh, set of properties so that yeah, we don't have so much data on our supplier class. Okay, so now that that's done, next thing we'll do is set up our application DB context. Okay, so that's one thing or another thing that we will have to do next. So let's just right click on our data folder here, then select add, and then select class. Then we will name this as application DB context. And then from here, since we are using EF core, we will be inheriting from DB context. Okay, and then yeah, once you do that, the at using statement will be also included by doing that. Okay, next thing we will do is set up our DB sets so that our suppliers data from the tables or from the supplier table will become available to us via EF core. So let's just add a DB set of type supplier. Okay, then name this suppliers. So we also need to pull this uh, class also. So since it's on a different namespace, so we'll just need to pull the namespace for this one, which is QuickGrid demo.models, since we placed it on a separate file. Okay, now that we have that, the rest is to just set up the rest of the uh, connections for our SQLite database. So save us some time. I'm just gonna go ahead and copy what's needed here, and I'll just quickly explain. So for this one, what I did is that on the constructor, we've initialized our path for our SQLite that will be used during the on configuring method. So first here, since our database is just part of our or within our project, which falls under data folder and then the Northwind DB. So that's where we've composed our path to specifically point to this database, and then during the on configuring method we will just use that as a path for our use.SQLite method so that this one becomes initialized and available to us. Okay, now we will have access to our SQLite database base via this application DB context. Okay, so now that's done. Next thing we do is to uh, hook up our EF core and our QuickGrid. Okay, so when we added the package for the QuickGrid entity framework adapter, what we also need to do is set it in our services or make it available. So here in our program.cs, we'll just do builder.services and then add QuickGrid entity framework adapter. Now this will become the a method that will connect or make QuickGrid aware of any entity framework data source. Okay, and so once we've done that, let's create a new Razor page that will contain our suppliers list. Okay, so let's right click on our pages, select add, and then Razor component. So let's just name this as suppliers, click add. Now here is where we set up our suppliers. Okay, first of all, to uh, to make our QuickGrid have access to our EF core SQLite database, first is we need to make the application DB context available in this component. And so we'll just declare our application DB context here. Okay. There's something, yeah, that's not quite working correctly with uh, Blazor. When working with Blazor is that, yeah, you have this autocomplete not quite working correctly. So we'll need to pull this up coming from our data namespace. Then let's just name this DB context, initialize it by default. And then after that is that we'll have to initialize our DB context from our factory. Okay. And so to do that, we'll need to add that during the on initialized async lifecycle. Okay, so here we have our DB context is equal to, one thing we forgot is we need to inject our factory, DB context factory, and to do that, up here, we need to inject our IDB context factory of our type application DB context, then let's just name it as DB context factory. Okay, so since we also need to pull up the namespace for this, which is entity framework core. Okay, now that we have that, we can now initialize our DB context. So that would come from our DB context factory dot create DB context. Okay, so now we have initialized our DB context. And also we also need to implement an iDisposable, since DB context requires you that when during the disposal you also need to dispose this context. So that would be during the disposal of the component. So, and to do that, we also need to implement the implements async disposable. Okay, and then implement its method, which is this one. Let's just move this down a bit here. Okay, and so what we only need to do is during the dispose, we just need to dispose our DB context. Oops, DB context dot dispose async. Okay, now that's done, now we can hook up our QuickGrid data, I mean our EF core suppliers data to our QuickGrid. Okay, so now we can, what we can do here is add a QuickGrid. Okay, let's pull the namespace for this one, and then what we can do next is set our items to come from our DB context. So DB context dot suppliers. Okay, and then after that we can define our properties just like what we did with our in-memory data source. So let's set our property for the first one, which would be x dot supplier ID. Okay, and let's just display all of the columns for this one. So to save us time, I'm just gonna go ahead and copy from our uh, original source. Okay, but basically it's just a simple property column mapping. So mapping each of the fields from our supplier class to our property columns. Okay, now I think we should be fine here. This should be enough to we forget also one thing is we need to set the page the route for this one, which would be names just suppliers. Okay, so now that we have that, we can run this one and see if our suppliers page will be uh, showing or displaying the suppliers table. using our QuickGrid component. Okay, now that we have that, let's just navigate to suppliers. And okay, now we're having provide DB context factor. So that means that we've forgot to inject this IDB context factory interface to our Razor component. So to fix that, we just need to add another line here in our program.cs. And so here next after this one, we'll just call services dot add DB context factory in the name of our application DB context. Okay, and that should fix our issue. Okay, let's run this again, and hopefully we'll be able to see our suppliers table. Let's go navigate back here. Okay, and as you can see now, we can see here that our suppliers table has been loaded. Okay, so let's just add a few styling for this one. Again, you can add class bootstrap classes here by using the class property. Just table ordered, and then table hover. All those three uh, usual classes for our table. And yeah, it looks better now. So if you refresh, then yeah, all of this data comes from our SQLite suppliers table. Okay, now we can also again add pagination to this one. So let's just quickly add pagination for this one. And to do that, we need to again add our pagination state. So let's declare here a pagination state. Okay, pagination state equal to new pagination state. Initialize our items per page to 10 rows. Okay, then after that, we need to set the pagination property here to our pagination state. And then to actually show the pagination controls, we will be using the paginator component, and then set the state to pagination state. Okay, so that should work. That should show the pagination controls. Okay, now we're having trouble. Let's just restart our application. Okay, let's run this again, and let's navigate to our suppliers page. And yeah, as you can see, we now have our pagination controls. This paging comes off directly from EF Core and to our SQLite database. Okay, so now that's all good for the pagination. Next thing we will do is adding filtering for this one. By the way, you can also apply sorting for this one. So just like what we did with the previous demo, you can just add the property sortable and then set it to true. If you save this one and let's refresh this page, then you should see that the column is now clickable, and then you can just click on it to sort. So the EF core adapter for the quick grid is, yeah, smart enough to know that you are sorting by specific column. Okay, just by setting the sortable to true. Okay, and then you do the uh, descending from Z to A. Okay, and it works as expected. Okay, again, you can do multiple sorting columns. Let's apply this one for the contact name. Again, just setting the sortable property to true. Save this one, hit refresh, and then you should be able to sort also the contact name. Yep, seems to work fine here. Nice. you might have also noticed that, yeah, you have the column names like their actual field names or property names. You can just change that by setting the title to the correct name with by having the spaces. Okay, so title set again to contact name, so it doesn't look awkward as being displayed on the table. Contact title, and then the supplier ID, let's just set this as just ID. Okay, so once we save this one, should be able to see that, yeah, the uh, naming of our columns are much better now. Okay, so that's one thing. All right, and so another thing would be adding filtering, okay, for this one. So with filtering, just as what we did with the first example or demonstration, we will have to do a different uh, data source coming off from uh, SQLite. So it becomes now an indirect source of data. So just like what we did with the cars table here, so we will add another data source which would become the filtered version of our suppliers. And following this way of setting up our data source for filtered data, then we can just do that here in our suppliers page. So here, let's say we want to filter by company name. And so as such, what we do again is declare another data source. Okay, so which means that would be an iQueryable of supplier. Let's pull the class here. Okay, and then filtered suppliers, and then from here we will set our filter, the actual filter or condition. Okay, so that would be coming off from our suppliers, from our EF core context, then set the where x is equal to. Now with this one we will do a bit of a different approach here. Okay, since now we are actually dealing with a database engine, and if we do actually try this one, this would not work since it has a different, like for this one, this is just an in memory, and then within in memory it directly supports this uh, contains method of comparing text. Okay, and so with this one, what we will do here is we will have to lower our uh, field that we are going to filter. So in this case, what would happen now is that we just need to lower it, x dot company name. Okay, company name dot to lower, so that we will be comparing. First we need to lowercase our what do you mean this? We need to lowercase the field that we are comparing against to, since we cannot directly do this model that contains, because for SQLite it doesn't support this kind of comparison, okay, or of kind of condition in our filter. So what we will do is need to lower it first, and then contains, and then we will pass our filter. So first we need to add a new company filter variable. So let's just do here company filter is equal to, initialize it as an empty one. Okay, and then we will pass it here company filter. Okay, let's do that. Okay, now that we have that, we also need to okay, let's just settle for this one for the moment. Okay, let's just filter one field. which is the company name. Okay, now that we have that, next thing we'll do is design our filter or search box. Okay, so to do that, we can just copy the one that we did from the other example here. Let's copy this search box. Let's copy the column options with the input search box here, and then let's bind this against our company filter. Okay, and yeah, that should set us up for filtering by company name. Okay, so let's try this one out. Let's run this one. Let's head on to our suppliers. Okay, now we have our option here to filter by company name. So let's say Lova. We missed something also. We forget to, let's close this one for a sec here. We forget to set our items, the new source for our suppliers, which would be the filtered suppliers. Okay, that should fix our issue. And let's run this again. And let's navigate to suppliers. And then let's try filtering one. Let's try filtering Pavlova. And as you can see, as you type, it would filter, yeah, in real time. So yeah, the adapter for the QuickGrid EF core is smart enough to know that you are or filtering against EF core. Okay, let's add another additional filter. Let's say you can filter by contact name. Okay, so let's stop this for a moment. You can just add another filter here like contact name, initialize it to empty, and then here we can just append another condition. That would be and x dot contact name that, again, we will have to lower this one so it becomes case insensitive, and that contains contact name. Forgot to complete the variable name, contact name filter. Okay, close that one up, and yeah, that should contact name. Okay, that should be good. So now let's try this one. We have now two filters, one for contact name and the other for the contact title. Okay, we also forgot to add the column options for the contact name. Let's quickly add that one here. Okay, and then bind the contact name filter, and then that should fix it. Let's refresh. Okay, now let's just stop this and run this again. Let's double check contact name filter. Okay, let's try this again. Let's navigate to suppliers, and then now we have our contact name. Now we can filter by contact name. Okay, as you can see, you have multiple results for Peter, and then you can also further filter the results by company name. Okay, so now both filters work for this one. So yeah, that is how you do or connect via EF core as your data source for your QuickGrid. Another great feature of QuickGrid is the QuickGrid scaffolder. So with the QuickGrid scaffolder, it would lets you or allows you to easily generate CRUD pages or pages for create, read, update, and delete. So how does that work? So let's go back to our project here, and For this one, we will be using the customers table, and for that we need to add a new class which will name customer. So this one will hold data for our customers. Okay, so let's add that one, and let's just add the fields for this. Okay, again, the fields for this one, or the properties, are almost similar to the supplier class with some additional fields here. So aside from these, we also have the postal code, country, phone, and fax. Okay, you might also be wondering why we have this nullable strings, because in our customers table with its existing data, some of the records have null values. So yeah, I've decided to just set their types as nullable strings. Okay, and so now that we have this one, let's add our customer. Let's link it to our EF core by adding a new DB set here of type customer, and let's name this customers. Okay, now that we have that, next thing that we can do is the scaffolding. Okay, and so to do that, what we can do is right click on our pages, select add, and then new scaffolded item. Okay, and so this will allow us to generate CRUD pages for our application. Here we can select Razor components using entity framework with CRUD, and then select add, and then here we will select the template as CRUD. You can also optionally select just a specific type of operation, whether be it creation, editing, deleting, or just the list of customers. And then here in the model class, we will select the customer class that we just created here, customer. And then for the context, since we already have our application DB context, then we can just select it here. If you don't have any existing one, then you can just select or click on this plus button to let you create a new data context for this one. And so after that, we just click on the add button, and then for a few moments, the scaffolder will generate the necessary CRUD pages for you, and then that would in turn allow you to just display, I mean, enable features for CRUD directly on your application without manually creating each of those features or pages. Okay, and so you might have also noticed that additional packages were also installed for this one, including entity framework core.tools, and then this code generation stuff. This is needed by the scaffolder. Okay, and then once that's done, the Razor pages will now be added to your project. And for this one, for the customers, it will fall under this customer pages folder. And if you expand this one, you will see that there are several uh, Razor pages that have been created for you. So first off would be the index. This would be the page where it would list all of our customers. Okay, and so if we run this one, let's just hide this first. If we run this one, we should be able to see that we can just navigate directly to the customers page and see that. Let's navigate to the customers page, and we will see that the table is already being constructed for us just by doing the scaffolding. So all of these pages are already been generated by the scaffolder. So with this one, you also have these options here to edit, view details, and then delete a record or a customer. And then it also lets you create a new customer via this link. Okay, so if you try this one out, You see that the forms have already been built up for you. That would allow you to create the customer. If you go back to list, it also allows you to edit by clicking on the edit. And so yeah, it works just like what if you do this manually, but it would definitely save you time if you are especially like doing prototypes. Then this is a quick way to generate CRUD pages, and each of these features or functionalities are already being built for you. Okay, back to list. You can also delete. If you try delete, you will go to this confirmation page, click delete, then that record should be deleted. All right. And so yeah, again, this generated pages are also still customizable. It depends on what you want to do with this. So for this one, if you want, for the data here is a bit crowded, you can just remove some of the sections here. Like let's say remove this 4 columns here, and then just leave this template column. So the template column is an option that you can add to your quick grid, wherein you can set whatever other uh, controls that you want to put in it. In this case, you have this uh, links to each of the individual functions for edit, details, and delete. If we save this one, we should see that yeah, it has been more compact now, since yeah, we've removed some of the columns here. And again, you can still apply filtering and sorting for these fields. Sortable would still work. Set to true, and yeah, if you refresh, then it should be sortable also. You can also add paging. Okay, let's quickly do that here. So let's declare a pagination state. Pagination state is equal to new pagination state of items per page set to 10. Okay, now then you can set that pagination property here on our quick grid, pagination state, and then show the pagination controls via the paginator component. Okay, set the state into pagination state. Save this one up. Let's refresh this one, and as you can see, you can quickly apply pagination in your tables. Okay, and so yeah, again, if you do want to apply filtering, you can still go with what we just did before, like creating a new iQueryable filtered data for that one, and then set it uh, as the new source for the items here. Okay, so that's one great feature of the QuickGrid scaffolder. The last thing that we will look at is how we can use remote data as a data source for our QuickGrid. So we can use a remote data source, which could be coming off from a REST endpoint, REST API endpoint that would produce a JSON result. And so for this demo, we will look at and use the Open Library Search API. So if you are curious, then this will be the search API that we will use. So this comes off from openlibrary.org. And for this one, the endpoint is called this. So it is openlibrary.org/search.json. So for this one, the output of this endpoint is a JSON data. Okay, so we will look at some of the parameters that are required for this to work. So I opted to use this endpoint since we don't have to do any other configuration apart from just calling directly the endpoint. So it's much easier for us to get started with this one as compared to some other uh, examples that we can use wherein it requires authentication and some other security setups that you need to do first. And so for this one, we can try and query this endpoint so that we can see what format of data it will produce. Okay, So I have here an open uh, a REST endpoint tester. So this one is a called Talent API. So you can use some other clients also like Postman or Boomerang. But what we can do here is we can just add this endpoint. We can use this search.json endpoint, and then we can add several parameters to it. Now, with this endpoint, it has quite some limitations wherein you can search for some specific fields, and then you can also sort, but again on a limited uh, capacity. And then it also allows you to do pagination wherein you can add or specify the page and then the limit or the number of rows that you want to return from this API. Okay, so we can quickly do a call here. So for this one, we will set the parameters to page 1, limit to 10, and then set the title. So for this API, you have to have a specific uh, query for a specific field, since it doesn't allow you to just go through uh, page return a page of data or a set of rows without specifying some query, because it has a lot of data in the millions. So probably because that is to prevent the server from yeah, using up so much resources for this endpoint, since this is freely available and very public endpoint. And so yeah, so we can quickly show, and let's just opt to not sort this query. Okay, so once we've specified these basic parameters, then we can just hit send, and then it should return a result. So this now will be uh, the format of the result. So if you focus your attention here under this section, so now it produces a JSON data, and then the actual results for the books that you have searched against will be under this docs uh, property or field from the JSON result. So now it shows you an array of books that satisfy our query for any title of book that has this the sun title or text in it. Okay, so now what we will do next is to take note of the format of this JSON data. So now we will start to do a mapping of equivalent classes for our QuickGrid. Okay, so next is, once we now have our idea of our JSON format, we can go back to our project, and then let's start adding some classes that will map against this JSON data. Okay, so let's head back here, and then from our models folder, let's just right click here and then select add class. Okay, then we'll just name this as book to store our data for the books. And then from there on, let's specify the fields that we will map against. Okay, so now if you notice, we are mapping against this return JSON data from this docs array of docs here. So now we will only map a few. We don't need to map all the rest of these JSON fields. Okay, so that this demo would be much easier or faster to go through. So first up is we have mapped against an author name. If you can see, you have author name here, which is an array of names, okay. And then you have your first published year. We map it against first published year here, and it's of type int. Okay, and then the language also would be here, an array of languages where this book is available. And then you also have the title, of course. Before we forget, we also have the title, which is this one. Okay, and then you might also have noticed that I have added this two additional properties. So since we cannot display this against directly on, I mean, we cannot display the language of types array of strings, we will have to convert it to an equivalent concatenated string of the languages. So what I did here is that this property would return all the data from these languages in uh, in a single string. Okay, as a single string, they are joined together by comma. Okay, same thing that I did with authors list. Okay, so we can have uh, a single list of authors, or I mean a single string of authors separated by comma. Okay, this would become more clear once we move to setting up our quick grid. Okay, and also before we continue, we will also need to have an additional mapping for the returned result. Aside from just the book itself, we also need to have this book queries result. Okay, so this will be used later on as we again set up our quick grid. So this one would map the in overall returned JSON here. So if you notice, we have int num found would map to this num found, which I guess would result into the number of books found from the query, and then against the docs. The docs would be this one mapping against a list of books. Okay. Okay. Now that we've done that, let's proceed to adding our book page. So let's right click on here on pages and then select add and then razor component. So now this will display our quick grid for a list of books. Okay, let's select add and then let's start writing our code here. Okay, so for this one, uh, to make use of the remote data, we need to have access to our uh, data source that comes from the remote data, which means that it's different from the other data source that we've used, like from EF core or from the in-memory. This time we will be using the grid items provider, which will now become the data source coming off from our remote data. And so let's just add some additional or declare some fields here. So as you can see, we have added a grid items provider, which will be used by our quick grid component. So let's pull up some namespaces here first quickly, and then that should fix that grid items provider, and including this book namespace coming off from our quick grid demo models. Okay, now after that we will create a method. This method would now set up uh, our data source that comes from our open library API. Okay, so let's add a new method here, which will be named load books. Okay, so this will be called in two places. We will see it later on. So but anyways, explaining this one, we have initialized our grid items provider. So this one is sort of a delegate, so which means we specify the method and the processes inside of it. Okay, and it should return a grid items provider result. Okay, now what happens here is that we have set up a parameters that we will pass on to our endpoint, which is this one, the one that I've shown you before, this one. So that is what we're setting up here. So including these parameters. So the parameters are stored in this dictionary. Same thing that we did from this test, okay, in this format. And then after that, we will build our URL that will become the final URL that we will call to fetch the data from OPN library. Okay, we need to also add some additional dependencies here, including this navigation, which comes off from at inject navigation manager navigation. So this one is a built-in object that we can use to uh, utilize whatever processes that we need to generate URLs. Okay, it has methods, several methods that you can use to construct URLs. Which in this case we have used get URI with query parameters, right? And then after that, once we've set up our URL complete with including its parameters, we will now do the actual call. So the actual call is this one. This is coming off from this HTTP variable, which also we need to inject here, which would be a HTTP client. Okay, then call HTTP. So this HTTP client is what we will use to make calls to our endpoint. Now, before we can actually do that here, we also need to set it up in our program CS. So we need to inject that HTTP client. So we can simply add it here, that services dot add HTTP client. Okay, and that should allow us to fetch this HTTP client dependency. And then from here, once it makes a call, so if you notice, it get from JSON async, and then you pass in the class that it will be mapped against, and then once that gets called, or once it calls the endpoint, it will return in the format of this book query result. Okay, and then from there on, we can pass the resulting documents or books in the format in this field, available in this field as docs, which would be in the format of a book that will then be used by our QuickGrid. Okay, so aside from having this load books method, we will now use it to load our books from on our own initialized lifecycle method. So what we do now here is to add it on our own initialized method, like so. And basically, once the on initialized lifecycle is triggered, then it will load our books. Okay, now another thing that we also need to do here next is to actually set up our quick grid. Now to do that, we'll just basically add our quick grid component here. Okay, so to save us some time, let me just quickly paste our quick grid code. And basically it's almost the same like what we did with our previous examples. The only difference there is that instead of the items, we will be using the items provider property, and then we pass in our grid items provider that will then hook it up to our remote data source. Okay, and then for the property columns, again as usual, same thing that we did from the other examples. So you specify the property of the individual columns here, okay, to be displayed on our table. And so virtualize is something that you can use if you want to do uh, uh, like endless scrolling. Okay, but we'll show an example of that after this one. So let's just remove this for now, and then we will try running this one to see if we will be able to display our table of books. Okay, so let's navigate to I think we missed something also. Since this is a routable page, we also need to add the add page directive, which would be books slash books, and let's see. Okay, so I think we've already covered the parameters here. Title will be coming from the title filter. By default is set to Sun because again uh, the endpoint doesn't allow you to not have a specific filter. Okay, so let's run this again and see how it would look like. And let's go back here. Let's navigate to books and cross our fingers. Then we have here our display of books. Okay, as you can see here. Next is we can add pagination as always. So let's just put the paginator component here. Save this one. Let's hit refresh here, and then we should be able to see our pagination controls. So you can paginate against remote data. Okay, so this one's straight coming off from our Open Library API, Search API. Okay, now if you want to apply sortable, it's a bit of a since we have so much limitation on the sort uh, function, or I mean sort option for that endpoint. So let's just not add that here, because yeah, it could be, I mean you could do that, but yeah, since we're quite limited with what we can do on that endpoint, so let's just leave it at not adding sorting. But what we can do is we can still add filtering. Okay, so to do that, instead of adding the filtering like what we did on the other examples, like here, let's see, this one, wherein you add a column options with the search input. We won't do that on this one since it's a remote data, and then we don't want to filter as you type, because it would eventually you'd reach a point where like you're causing too much too many requests on the endpoint, then which causes again errors on our end. So to limit that, what we can do is add a separate search box outside of our quick grid, like so. So basically, it's a basic input, text input for our search or filter, and then a button that you can use to actually filter the books. Okay, so for that one, what we just need to do is add another method that would filter our uh, or I mean run our filter. Okay, so let's add that here. So it's named filter books, which basically just calls the load books method. Okay, and that's what we set here during the on click event of this button. Okay, let's save this one and let's try doing a filter. Okay, so if we search, you see that it's already filled in with the default search filter, which is the sun. Then we can replace that with something else, maybe it's the moon, and then once we click this find button, then we should be able to get the results from that filter. Okay, as you see, it still functions just like we did before. What about uh, solar system? I don't know if yeah, it does. Okay, universe, yeah, so it returns in the thousands of records, but each page would still be an actual individual call or separate call. And so yeah, that's one way of using remote data as your data source. Okay, so let's, one thing also that you can do is we can try out is like now virtual we can't have that one, but yeah, you can have sort of infinite scrolling. But yeah, maybe we can pull that one quickly. Okay, let's quickly create that I mean infinite scrolling of remote data. So what we can do is like add a new page here. Let's name the books infinite. Okay, and then add in the code. So now this one would display an infinite scrolling of books. Okay, so let's change the route here to books infinite, and let's see if yeah, we could actually show infinite scrolling. Okay, let's go and navigate to Books Infinite. Okay, and it should load up. And once you scroll down, you will see that every time you scroll past the past the shown rows, then it would continue loading the rest of the data. Okay, so now you'd end up with infinite scrolling of data. Okay, so this one is possible by setting up a virtualize and then not using a paginator for this one, so that you end up with this infinite scrolling quick grid. Okay, even you can use the page up, page down, or just the arrow down, arrow up. So every time you navigate up and down, then it should always load some data. Okay, and so now that's how you do virtual or infinite scrolling for QuickGrid. And so I guess that completes our uh, session for this time for examining and taking a look at QuickGrid and what things that you can do with it. Especially when you try, this would come in handy when you are like trying to prototype something quickly, and then yeah, QuickGrid could come in handy during those phases of your development. And so if you like this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel so you get updated with our latest videos. And as always, please don't stop learning and continue moving forward. And see you again on our next video, and have a wonderful day.